Taped to the floor. Yes, it is.
Thank you. Hello, Abraham. Life is good.
It is.
Talked about manifestations, and even great manifestations, and the desire to build great things.
What's with all of you in this manifestation stuff? You act like physical beings.
It's all mumbo
who live in
jumbo.
physical houses and drive physical cars.
Well, this question is a little bit shallow compared to the other wonderful questions that were asked.
We've never heard one, and we certainly do not expect one from you.
Okay. And I've always been very intrigued about what was the intent behind the great manifestation of the building of the pyramids in Egypt, specifically the ones in Giza. Why would they build them, and what was their purpose, and when?
Well, the purpose of them was for the maintaining of physical bodies. In other words, they were built not just as a shrine, but as a tomb to protect those carcasses from the elements, because the misguided pharaohs who decided to construct the pyramids believed that they were going to return to those bodies, and they wanted them to be in good shape when they got back.
Okay. Now, the reason why I asked the question is because there's been some speculation that possibly they were machines for harnessing the energy of the earth and projecting energy beams. So it's kind of like the interest that I had into it.
Well, not so much machines as in the same way that we've been talking all day here today, and scientists will be interested in this if they can leave the realm of fact and reality and come a little bit into the realm of fantasy and imagination. They will find some clues for harnessing energy. And we've been talking about it all day here today, that one who's connected to the stream is more powerful than millions who are not. You are harnessing. Your scientists today, while they are utilizing the power that they are terming electricity, they have not begun to understand it. They've not begun to understand it. When you harness sound energy in the way that you are harnessing light energy, because of the denser frequency of the sound vibration, you will get more movable energy from it. So it was about that.
So they thought maybe by concentrating the electrical energy that they would actually propel their body somewhere? Was that the idea?
Well, they were lightning loads. They understood leverage. In other words, a lot of it was through the sheer will and power of just moving one thing to another place. But the leverage of it was something that they received clarity about from inside the vortex. And it's all kinds of things that they were utilizing in that day in terms of leverage, even in terms of water buoyancy, all kinds of things that are not even being considered when that subject is approached today.
So having said that, when were they built? And by whom?
By the civilization that was present at the time that those people who were put in the tomb was put in the tomb. In other words, it was that constituency. It was that. You see, it's an interesting thing, because humans, while we talk about you being on the leading edge, we also want you to remember that you have been creating in this environment for a very long time. And while you are at your furthest extension of creativity, scientifically, you haven't even come close to catching up with some of the things that some were doing before. In other words, the true motion forward is in the spiritual intertwining. You have been more technologically advanced than you are today. Not spiritually, not harmonically, but technologically.
Technologically. Okay,
Yes.
that confirms that. Now, can I move on to a deeper question? Okay, and thank you so much. That completely satisfies my question. The next one is a little bit deeper. It's about
Well, now we get the point that you were making about the shallow question. Because while those tombs aren't shallow, they made sure. But in the sense that it's not really much for you to do much about. In other words, you have come forth in this time to explore what's around you in order to launch your rockets, in order to come into vibrational alignment with them.
Got it.
So the part about what you were asking before that we think is intriguing and really worth complimenting you on probing in that question about is that there are all kinds of things that those people of that time put into the vortex that humans have not allowed themselves to discover yet. In other words, asking that was put there. You put things into the vortex that future generations will benefit from. And that's why when you finally are able to let go of the bindings of your practical what is-itis, where you're only willing to acknowledge what is, and instead you become more an emotional being, more of a light being, more of a floating being, more of a what scientists would call maybe an irrational being. When you become more of an optimistic being, when you become more of an aligned being, when you tune in to the frequency of what's in that collective vortex, that's where scientists gain their greatest insights, you see. And if they didn't feel such a compulsion to, as soon as they get the insight, if they didn't feel such a necessity to build bridges to bring everybody else along, if they could just discover on their own, leaving big gaps in technology maybe, but study and know and prove to themselves, then others who then witness what they accomplish would then come across the bridge that is then laid. You see what we're getting at?
Yes.
It's the need to bring everybody with you every step of the way that slows everything down. And don't you know that when you try to convince your mother that you want to do something, or when you try to convince anybody, isn't it easier to just make up your mind, line up with it, let universal forces work it into being, and then when it happens, your mother says, well, of course, I always knew you could do that. Yes.
Well, in that case, I do have a question where you can help me with. And I've been practicing a great deal of your techniques, and I've completely changed my life. I mean, I do live in joy. And actually, sometimes I find myself trying to get a little bit out of the vortex so I can have a new creative idea, just to get a little bit more spiced up.
Well, we want to give this to you. You don't have to leave the vortex to have expansion. In other words, several of Jerry and Esther's friends, and Jerry and Esther and Abraham, were just sailing on a ship to Costa Rica and through the Panama Canal, through some of the locks. And it was such an interesting thing to be on this big vessel with one body of water 84 feet lower than the other body of water. Wonder how they did that. Wonder how they could possibly do that. How could they get way up there from way down here? So the canal closed a lock. The water rose to the level where the ship was, and then the doors opened and the ship just glided right in. Actually, it was dragged in by the little tractors who were running along the side. The ship just went right into the canal. We began calling it the Vortex Canal. Right into the canal. And then, because it couldn't leap to the next level of water, it waited while that reservoir was then filled. And when that body of water was level with the next, the lock opened and the ship just glided right into the next. So we like to liken this Panama Canal to what it's like when you enter your vortex, because entering the vortex is about raising vibration and raising vibration. But even once you're in there, we talked about the specific out of the vortex, and then the general out of the vortex, and then the general approaching the vortex, and then the general in the vortex. But you could be in the vortex. Several people were talking about how they've been listening to this meditation CD, and they're finding themselves feeling relaxed. They're feeling the edge has been taken off. They're feeling relaxation and satisfaction. But they were wondering if they were not as focused as maybe they wanted to be. And we were explaining that once you release resistance enough that you're in the first locks, so to speak, of this vortex canal, the vortex will call you forward into greater and greater specifics and into greater and greater clarity. So you don't need to worry ever about needing to go out and look for negative stuff in order to goose up your energy. You have enough in your vortex to keep yourself busy for 20 or 30 lifetimes. And as we just said, there's all kinds of stuff in the collective consciousness vortex that has been put there by previous generations that has not even begun to be tapped into by those of you who are there. In other words, there's plenty there. The important thing to understand is, from where you are, there is always, no matter where you are emotionally, there is always a potentially better feeling. Because you can't you can't stop from expanding. And because you are moving forward vibrationally first, there is always a gap to be closed between where the rest of you is and where you have reached to. In other words, you never need to worry about that. And that, in fact, is what the feeling of passion is. That's what the feeling of exhilaration is. It's you closing that gap again, closing that gap again.
Excellent answer.